Honestly, he's really downplaying. It was actually very stressful last night when we met at the speaker's dinner. And he was asking, do you have any hobbies you want to tell me about or any exciting goals? And I was like, oh God, I have no goals. I have no interesting hobbies. I think I left the dinner quite convinced that I was really quite boring and purposeless. So thank you for that real confidence boost. It was a special time. Anyway, okay, it's fine. I'm refreshed this morning. I'm like, yes, I'm great. Cool. All right. Welcome to Standing Out Online with a unique and compelling brand voice. Very exciting. We are going to split our all too brief time together today into three chunks, three sections broadly. We're going to kick off with just thinking a bit about what on earth brand voice actually is. It's quite a common term. It gets thrown around a lot. It's having a bit of a moment in marketing. But what actually is it? Why should we care? Why is it important? What will it do for us? What will it not? So we're going to unpack that a little bit. Then we're going to move on to the fun stuff, looking at brand voice in action. So we're going to take a look at a couple of brands, some you may have heard of, some you might not, and actually have a look. How are they using language to connect with their customers? What works, what doesn't, what do we like, and why? Partly because I think that's one of the best ways to learn, to look at examples, and also because it's just kind of fun to pull apart what other brands are doing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we are going to finish off by, got ahead of myself, finish off by getting nice and practical. Because obviously, once you have heard this wonderful and inspiring talk, you will be so convinced about how important brand voice is, you'll be desperate to commit all of your available time and money to developing a great voice for your business. And so I want to make that as easy as possible for you. So we've got a nice practical kind of 5 steps to how do you go about crafting a voice for your business. Does that sound okay? Great. To be honest, that's a really rhetorical question because this is the only presentation I have. So if you all went, oh, that sounds rubbish, I'd be like, oh, well, let's just carry on and see. So let's full steam ahead. We'll go with it. Okay. What is brand voice? Well, the definition that I use in my work and have found to be the most helpful is understanding brand voice as a consistent way of writing that effectively communicates your organizational personality to your audience. And of course, in true wordsmith style, I'm now going to break this definition down, take you through it painstakingly to unpack what that means a little bit. So the first word that I want us to think about is this idea of brand voice being a way of writing, a way of communicating. This tiny little word is actually something that's really key, really core to properly understanding what brand voice is. We're not particularly thinking about what you say to your customers or consumers. We're thinking about how you say it. So we're thinking less about content, which actually will be in the next talk, is touching on content, and we're thinking more about style. So no matter what you say to your customers and no matter where you talk to them, no matter what information you communicate, how are you talking to them? Literally, what actual vocabulary are you choosing and why? What order are your words going in? Even down to punctuation, grammar, sentence structure, all that glorious detail of language, which is why I love my job. And you'll see as we go why that level of detail is important, significant. But that's very much what we're going to be focusing on today. A really silly, quick illustration. Let's imagine that I have come to this session today, and obviously realizing how brilliant it's going to be, I'm desperate to take a ton of notes, but I realize, I've forgotten a pen. I could turn to the person next to me and say, oh, excuse me, do you have a pen I could borrow? Or I could turn to the person next to me and say, oi, give me a pen. Now, obviously, the content, the information communicated in both of those different examples was basically the same. I'm communicating that I don't have a pen and I would like to get one from you. But obviously, the style, the language I chose to use in those two different examples was hugely different. The first one was much more polite, very formal language, phrased as a question. The second one, naturally directed towards Carl, was much more demanding. It was very informal, quite colloquial language. And if you didn't know me, and that was the only interaction we'd had, you would be left with a very different impression of what I was like as a person, depending on which one of those approaches I went for. And so that is just, in a nutshell, what we're going to be thinking about today. So we're not talking about information, we're talking here about whatever you have to communicate and wherever and whenever you communicate it. How are you communicating it? What kind of language are you using? And what sort of impact is that having on your customers? So that's the focus. Second word, just to sort of quickly clarify, I particularly, certainly in my work, obviously as a copywriter, but I particularly find it helpful to think about brand voice, mainly in the context of written communication. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that your written communications, particularly the bigger pieces of marketing, like your website or maybe your social media, channels or campaigns and things, are most often not coming from any one individual. They're the things that are coming from your whole organization, particularly something like a company website. So there isn't any individual voice. It's got to be the company and the organizational voice. Whereas, for example, in something like, in this context, when I'm speaking to a group of people, or if you're talking one-on-one with a customer or client, or you're emailing someone and it's coming specifically from you, whilst obviously decisions about the voice, the values, the style of your organization are going to impact how you communicate, the most important voice is yours. No one wants to be talking to a sort of company robot just reading off a script. People want to engage with a real human being. And so your voice is more significant and how you think and talk about your business when it's coming from you as a human being, as opposed to lots of your written communication and written marketing where it's coming from the organization as a whole. So that's another kind of focus area for brand voice. A really important thing to note about brand voice, it sounds sort of obvious, but it does actually have to sound like you. You can't just go, hey, you know what, Netflix, everyone thinks they're pretty cool these days, we should just talk like them. Or you can't just look around at your competitors and go, do you know what, they're not doing a very good job of talking to young people, so maybe we could fill that slot. Let's just sound really young and cool and trendy. If that's not actually what your business is like, then that is not going to be an effective voice. What you've got to root your voice in is a firm understanding of what your organization is actually like. I like this word personality. I think people don't very often think about organizations as having a personality, but inevitably they do. You know, what is your mission as an organization, your passion, your goals? Why do you exist? Who are you serving? How do you want to make life better or different for them? And really getting under the skin of how you operate as a business and why you exist. That's the rich stuff that is going to inform your voice, whether it's really important for you to sound authoritative and trustworthy and knowledgeable, or perhaps it's really important for your brand to sound supportive and kind and warm, or maybe it's important, you're a challenger brand, for you to sound kind of disruptive and challenging and, as a wordsmith, this is not good, I'm forgetting the word I want to use. Awkward, let's move on. Whatever the thing is that you need to sound, that's what we need to base a voice in. It's not just an arbitrary thing that you sort of slot on over the top. It's got to be rooted in who you are. But equally, on the other side of that, we've also got to think about our audience. After all, this is the whole point of brand voice. It's the whole point of really everything that we're talking about across this whole conference. We're talking about a series of people that we are trying to engage with our products or services because we want them to take an action of some kind. So absolutely, we've got to bear our audience in mind. But one caveat, I'll say, in the context of brand voice, is that you don't want to get too overexcited about your audience. Your brand voice is not about attempting to mimic the way your audience communicates. It's simply about bearing them in mind. So your voice mostly needs to be a reflection of your organizational identity, of your brand and who you are as a business. But you've got to bear in mind, the people that I'm talking to, what kind of language will make sense to them? What kind of language will draw them in? What kind of language might confuse them or put them off? You've just got to bear that in mind, just the way we do as human beings when we talk to people. The difference of how I explain the work that I do to an audience of people at a conference versus when my 7-year-old niece asked me what I did for a job. By the way, she found the idea of someone just writing for a living really hilarious and didn't understand it. She was like, why would you want to do that? I was like, oh, never mind. But we understand that instinctively as human beings, that you slightly alter your language depending on who you're talking to. And it's just the same as a business. Bear that audience in mind, understand the perspective they're coming from with regards to language, and let that contribute to the shaping of your organizational voice. And then the final word to pick out, right back to the beginning, is this importance of your voice being consistent. Again, sounds kind of obvious, but you've got to make sure that if you're going to have a concerted effort to develop an overarching style of communicating, that you do actually use it at every point at which you engage with your customers. So this is particularly interesting, actually, as obviously social media has really taken off for businesses, because there's a bit of a feeling of like, this is how we normally talk to customers, and then, oh, but on social media, everyone's really chilled and informal, and we just need to chat to everyone like they're our best friend. Like, there's too many things wrong with that to go into in one short seminar, but that is definitely not a helpful approach. We need to be thinking about, across the whole of our business, how do I communicate with my customers? No matter what the platform, no matter what the context, do I sound like the same person? You don't want to sound schizophrenic as a business. You want to get to a point where whether someone reads your website, follows you on social media, reads a blog, meets you in person, gets an email from you, that they have a sense of feeling that they're hearing from the same organization. So consistency is vital. Okay, so brand voice, a consistent way of writing that effectively communicates your organizational personality to your audience. So let's just have a look now at a couple of brands and some of the pieces of writing they've done. I've just pulled a few bits of copy, mainly from websites, but also from some print ads, and just delve into some of the language that they've chosen to use and see how have they chosen a way of speaking that really reflects, or doesn't, the type of brand that they are. So, okay, first one. Everybody familiar with the Ritz? Has anyone ever stayed there? Nice, I'll be talking to you afterwards. I've never stayed there. Okay, so tell me some things that we know about this brand. What kind of words do we associate with them? Just shout out. Posh, flash, I heard. Yep, posh. Expensive, yeah, hence the reason I've never stayed there. Oh, shout louder. Polite? Okay, yeah. Sorry? Luxurious, yep. So definitely very high-end, expensive. I like posh. Posh is a good word. Apparently, though, side note, sociological thing, apparently if you use the word posh, you're not. Which is not good for me because I use it all the time. So what does that tell you? Anyway, okay, so the Ritz. High class, expensive, but luxurious, very kind of high-end brand. So let's look at just a small piece of copy from their website homepage and kind of dig into the nice, delicious detail of their language and see how have they communicated some of those aspects of their brand. I'll read it out just in case it's a bit faint. The Ritz experience. Step into a 5-star world steeped in more than 110 years of history and the finest of British traditions when you arrive at our magnificent hotel in Piccadilly. Oh, I want to go. Okay, let's pull this apart a little bit. There's some really interesting things going on here. Right from the start, they've got this really nice, the Ritz experience. You know, this is not a travel lodge or a holiday inn. This is not just some place to lay your head for the night. This is a whole experience. And they've really followed that through with their language. Step into a 5-star world. This is not just a hotel. This is an entire immersive experience. And that some of the other language they've used really backs that up. This nice word in the middle, steeped in more than 110 years of history. I realize some of this may not translate. I recognize a lot of you are listening in your second, third, fourth language. Sadly, I'm one of those traditional English people that just speaks English. I'm really sorry about that. But hopefully the concepts, the ideas will still translate even across language barriers. The word steeped, I find it such a fascinating one. I mostly associate it, I think, with like food or drink. You know, the idea of steeping a tea bag, or it's about sort of infusing flavor into something so it's soaked all the way through. So it's just a really, really nice reinforcement. They're not just saying the Ritz experience. Even the little bits of language they've chosen to use are reinforcing that idea that every single part of your stay at the Ritz is going to be infused with quality and luxury and style and glamour. I really like, as well, this nice adjective at the end, when you arrive at our magnificent hotel in Piccadilly. it's quite a grand sort of adjective. And I think, to be honest, if it was coming from a lesser brand, I'd be a bit like, all right, calm down. Don't take yourself too seriously. We're not in a Disney movie. Calm down. But somehow, from the Ritz, it works. They could have said our lovely hotel, our beautiful hotel, our wonderful hotel. But it's magnificent. It's like a whole level up, The Ritz is so extraordinary that no ordinary adjectives will do for them. They've really just stepped it up a notch. It's interesting. Really nice mention of history and tradition, particularly British tradition. One of the main target audiences for the Ritz is rich American tourists. And I can say this, I think, because I am half American, they love just Britishness. Honestly, my relatives, they drive me nuts about it every time they come. They're just like, oh my God, it's so cute. Everything about Britain is so cute. And they just, actually, sorry, that was a really bad impression. But it's a nice kind of nod to that it's not just history and tradition generally, but they're really anchoring it in something they know will really appeal to their target audience, British traditions. And although actually 110 years, that specificity actually to an English audience doesn't particularly seem that old, obviously to an American audience, they have a comparatively young culture and country, so 110 years actually seems like quite a long time. So just a really nice, really some quite simple sort of choices, but actually, if you think about, not just the English language, I assume other languages as well, the richness of language, that there's very rarely only one word that means something in a language. You only have to pick up a dictionary, a thesaurus, or of course in modern times go on thesaurus.com, which is basically my best friend as a copywriter, to see that any given word in a language has 5, 10, 15, 20 others that mean slightly different but very similar thing. So in terms of conveying this information about their lovely hotel and its history, I don't know what the maths are, but given all the different word combinations, there's probably about 50 or 100 different ways that they could have conveyed this information. But they've specifically chosen those words in that order, and very little punctuation, one really long, kind of luxurious, relaxed sentence, none of this kind of punchy marketing for them. It's very much like, no, the Ritz is something that you're prepared to wait for. Take your time over it, take your time and enjoy it. So it's just fascinating to me that there's just a million ways they could have communicated, but this is what they've chosen to do. And I don't know about you, but I think it's very effective. I think it gives a really nice impression of the luxury and the quality of an experience there, especially versus other hotel chains. Okay, next one. I realized after I chose this, obviously Macmillan, primarily a British charity, so I might be relying on the Brits in the room a little bit. Does anyone know, what can you tell me about Macmillan, if you've heard of them? What are they like as they're a cancer support charity? What kind of words do we associate with their brand? What are they like? Sorry? Oh yeah, cake. They are, for those of you who don't know, they're quite famous for their fundraising coffee mornings. So yes, cake. Sympathetic, humble, yeah. Caring, yeah. They're very warm. Their sort of strapline is no one should have to face cancer alone. So it's very supportive, very kind of community sort of feeling about it. But also, interestingly, they're very empowering as a brand. It's not like, oh no, those poor people with cancer, we're all so sad. It's actually very positive, very kind of, you can do this, you can fight cancer, we'll fight with you. Really, really nice kind of, quite a lot of energy behind it, actually, which is really lovely. So let's have a little look at something. Here it's on a t-shirt. I think I've seen it in their print ads as well, though. Let's have a little look at how some of those brand attributes come across in this piece of copy. Again, I'll read it out. We fund nurses. We climb mountains. We fight inequality. We give our time. We support families. We make coffee. We give grants. We live with cancer. We change lives. Nice? Yeah? Let's break it down a little bit. Let's have a look. I feel like the first really interesting thing is, so who do they mean by we? Who's we? Yeah, exactly. Really interesting, because most organizations, when they use the pronouns like that, when they say we, they're talking about themselves, the organization. But actually, these guys have done a really nice job of very clearly showing that this we is a really inclusive we, a really community-based we. And the way they've done that is by giving so many different examples that it becomes clear that it's not just them as an organization. Obviously, some of those are things that Macmillan themselves do, but things like climbing mountains and making coffee, those are very clearly things that supporters can do. And actually, the We Live With Cancer, that's even including the beneficiaries of the charity in the community. So it's a really, really nice, inclusive pronoun right at the start there. There's something really nice actually about I'm going to call it sort of sentence structure, but of course what you notice is they're not technically sentences because there's not actually any punctuation. And I don't know about you, but I think it would read really differently if you imagine at the end of each of those phrases a comma, and it kind of being set out in a more run-on, like a typical paragraph. I feel like it would read really differently, even if you weren't reading it out loud, you were just reading it off the page. I feel like it would become much more kind of like, we fund nurses, we climb mountains, we fight inequality, we give our time, we're just listing things that we do, it's kind of boring now. I just feel like it would lose all of its punch. And actually, what they've done is just really simply taken out the punctuation, and straight away you've got this really nice, really rhythmic, we fund nurses, we climb mountains, we fight inequality. They've got a really nice, strong set of verbs, and all except one are only one syllable, so it really adds a really nice punch and a sense of pace to it, which just really reinforces the fact that the brand is very active and empowering and engaged. It's not just oh, we're really sad that you've got cancer, let us help you with that. It's very proactive and supportive. I've had my 5-minute warning, so I'm going to kind of race through this a little bit. I just get too excited by all these different examples of copy. I could talk about them for hours. This last one, I know you guys won't have heard of these because they're quite a small local charity where I am in the UK. But the short story on them is they're a hospice. They do what they say on the tin. They offer end-of-life care, so looking after people with different kinds of terminal illnesses. They're very warm, loving, and supportive. And also actually quite funny, surprisingly humorous. But the question is, does that come across in some of their website copy? The Inpatient Facility was opened in 1992 with the hope that patients and families would treat it as an extension of their own home. This remains an important factor. So our aim is to combine a relaxed and informal atmosphere with a high level of individualized specialist care for both the patient and their family/friends. We like to meet close family on your first visit if they wish to come. On subsequent visits, if your family transport you, they're welcome to join us for a cup of coffee in the morning or tea in the afternoon. I really enjoyed the specificity of that last bit. God help you if you want coffee in the afternoon. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to super quickly go. Basically, just as an overarching thing, it really doesn't feel very warm and supportive at all. They talk about wanting to have a relaxed and informal atmosphere, but actually none of the language they've chosen is either relaxed or informal. They've chosen very formal, quite cold language, even using family/friends, words like inpatient facility. So again, they've gone the complete opposite direction. They've tried to indicate something about their brand, and they've told you relevant information, but everything about the tone and the style that they've used has undermined that message about their brand. I'm going to actually skip on past that because we're running out of time. And I'm going to super quickly go through my little five points at the end. Just a little disclaimer. Someone told me that I should include more fun images in my presentation to make them more visually engaging. But I got really bored finding photos of people in board meetings and trying to look excited in front of whiteboards. So the photos actually have very little to do with the points. They're just photos of cute dogs. So if you're bored of listening to me, you can just enjoy the dogs. So really quick, 5 steps to finding your brand voice. If you want to start thinking about how do we use language in the best possible way as an organization, how do we start conveying something of who we are to people? First place to start is you've got to look at your current voice. Hate to break it to you, but you've already got one. If you use words to talk about your business, you can't escape having a voice and giving people an impression of what you're like. So take some time to understand where you're at now so that you know how far you've got to go. Then, thinking back to our definition at the beginning, you've got to make sure you're really clear on who you are as an organization and who you're talking to. If you can't understand those two things, you're not going to get the connecting point, which is brand voice, right. Third point, then you need to actually get down to defining your voice. Those things we talked about earlier. Is it important to sound creative and quirky and playful? Is it important to sound authoritative and trustworthy? Is it important to sound supportive and warm and friendly and human? Whatever the things are, nail it down, be clear about what you want to sound like as a brand. Step 4, this is honestly the most important one. This step is why I have a job, because so many companies stop after step 3. They go, oh yeah, we just want to sound fun and cool and youthy and playful, and then they don't bother to actually flesh out what that looks like. If you have more than one person writing on behalf of your business, the chances are their definition of playful is quite different. So you really need to be clear, what do you mean by those terms? What's that going to look like? What kind of language choices are you going to make that possible? And then the 5th one, kind of just an extension of that. Whatever decisions you make in step 4, just make sure you write them down clearly. Come up with a set of simple, easy to use, easy to engage with guidelines that just say, okay, this is who we are, this is what we want to sound like, and this is how we're going to do it, so that you can pull people back to that and make sure that you're all staying within the brand voice. So that's me, and if you want a copy of the slides or to know any more about what I do, then you can go to the dedicated link at my website. Thank you very much.